Hey guys, welcome to part 8 of What If Tanjiro Had Hamon. Last time we left off after the conclusion of the fight against Upper Moon Tudama, and Kaneo and Inosuke mourning their losses. With everyone caught up, let's begin. Elsewhere in the Infinity Fortress, the Snake and Love Hashira attempt to fight the replacement Upper Moon 4, and controller of the castle, Nakime. However, her manipulation of the fortress allowed her to prevent them from getting close enough to behead her. Meanwhile, Muagio and Chiyomiya were running through the Infinity Fortress, when a wall suddenly pushes Muagio, separating the duo. With Muagio telling Chiyomiya to continue moving forwards to locate Muzan. Muagio is forced through multiple walls before landing in a room full of numerous pillars. The demon inside notices him and comments he looks rather familiar. Muagio is shocked, now face to face with Upper Moon 1. Due to neither of the combatants knowing Hamon, the fight would go the same. Ending in Muagio and Genya's death and Kokushibo's ultimate demise being caused by himself losing the will to continue regenerating, crumbling to ash. After realizing he was no longer the samurai he dreamt of becoming. Just as Chiyomiya and Sanemi had finished mourning and started searching for Muzan, elsewhere in the Infinity Castle, Muzan would finally emerge from his cocoon. Killing all the low-level slayers around him, using them to fuel his recovery. Muzan gloats at Tameo and says that her medicine to cure demons and turn them back into humans had failed, as the woman responds that this would be the day where Muzan would finally go to hell. The demon flippantly responds that hundreds of people had said those same words to him before, but they had yet to come true. Tameo tells him to give back her husband and children, and Muzan coldly looks at her and says that in that case she could go join the family she had killed, as he crushes her head in his hand. Yoshio immediately falls to the ground while running as this happens, tearing up the floor and gritting his teeth in rage at Tameo's death. Muzan swiftly makes short work of the second troop as well, slicing through them all in one move as Kiryu orders for them to fall back and asking about Jiryu's whereabouts. Muzan says that not one of them was of use to him as he killed them, and declares that he will end the Demon Slayer Corps on this night as smirks with an evil expression. A crow announces to the other Demon Slayers that Muzan has been revived and passes on Kiryu's order for all the Hashira to gather immediately. Mitsuri Kanroji is shocked to hear the news, as Abane Iguro curses the fact that he and Mitsuri are being held back by Nakime while the others had already slain the other upper rank. Even at the cost of Muagio Tokito and Genya Shinazugawa's lives. Mitsuri is confused at the order they have received and wonders if that means they should meet up with the other Hashira and leave Nakime alone. She is suddenly whisked away by the hem of her cloak by someone as Nakime plays her biwa again. Meanwhile, Muzan, who was standing amidst the corpses of all the demon slayers he had killed, is suddenly teleported into a large room with Tanjiro Kamado and Jiryu Tomioka joining him. Tanjiro is shocked to see the demon and his mind floods with memories of his family's murder, Nezuko Kamado as a demon and all his fallen comrades. Enraged, he grips his sword tightly and looks fiercely at Muzan, but Jiryu tells him to calm himself down. Muzan begins to speak to them, saying they are all persistent and that sickened him to the bottom of his heart. Continuing on, the demon says that the demon slayers always talked about avenging their families or friends. Believing that they should just be thankful that they themselves had not died and should simply go on back to the way they used to live. Tanjiro is shocked at these words and asks Muzan what he is saying, as the demon compares himself to a natural disaster. Saying that no one swore vengeance on earthquakes or storms when they killed people. Saying that the dead could not be brought back to life and that they should all just go back to earning their daily wages. He says that most humans do that and that the only reason the demon slayers did not do the same was because they were a bunch of deviants and that he was sick of dealing with deviants. Muzan says that he is the one who truly wanted this state of affairs to come to an end, as Tanjiro comes to a boiling point and says with a calm, seething rage that Muzan was a being that should not be allowed to exist. As Tanjiro Kamado stares down Muzan Kibuzui, the young demon slayer notes to himself how this is the first time he has ever felt such sheer rage at any living being. Knowing that the demon lord will not be defeated simply by cutting his head off and that they will have to drag him out into the sun or land a foul blow with Hamon to truly be rid of him for good. Aiming to stall Muzan and buy enough time for the other demon slayers to join them, Tanjiro resolves to get any information that could prove useful out of his skirmish to tell the others and make the task easier for them all. Muzan suddenly swings his tubes at both Tanjiro and Jyutamyoka and the demon slayers are able to dodge the attack. Muzan gazes at a tube, taking in his new form's prowess and then unleashes an even more ferocious attack at the demon slayers. Jiryu just barely blocks the attack with a water-breathing, 11th form, dead calm, and the water Hashira notes the speed of the attacks and also that the tubes are as sharp as swords. Tanjiro is entirely unable to keep up with the attacks and dodges them on pure instinct but still attempts to get in through the tubes, closer to Muzan. He manages to do so, but before he is able to attack Muzan, the demon slices at him and manages to cut into his eye. Jiryu comes in close to scoop Tanjiro up and away from Muzan, warning the boy not to get close. Saying that Muzan is far stronger than an upper rank and that it is best to keep their distance as beheading Muzan will have no effect. Ruing the lack of cover and that the door to the room is covered by Muzan, Jiryu attempts to keep Tanjiro safe as the demon realizes what the Hashira's strategy is. Saying that the sun does not penetrate the Infinity Castle, Muzan asks if 3 Hashira are really enough to accomplish this task. The Count takes Jiryu and Tanjiro by surprise as Muzan continues on and says that Abanai Iguro and Mitsuri Kanroji had already been killed by his subordinate Nakaime, as he had seen this through her eyes. The demon slayers dodge another wave of attacks from Muzan and Tanjiro urges himself not to become a burden now that he has lost an eye. Attempting to use his smell to keep up, Tanjiro is shocked as he finds that Muzan's attacks are so fast he is unable to even smell them. Finding himself unable to keep up his breaths, Tanjiro's new blind spot gives him a harsh reminder of its existence as he smacks into a wall on his right side. Jiryu calls out to the boy as Muzan launches an attack his way, barely able to block Tanjiro on in concern. Suddenly Mitsuri bursts into the scene by breaking through the wall behind Muzan and the demon, and Jiryu look on in shock that she is in fact alive. Unleashing a love-breathing, 6th form, cat-legged winds of love, Mitsuri looks on dumbfounded as Muzan shrugs off the attack with ease and not even a scratch on him. Abanai picks up Tanjiro and orders him to fall back instead of being a burden. Tanjiro is grateful that both Abanai and Mitsuri are still alive, and Abanai does a double take in shock, telling Tanjiro to worry about himself first. Looking on, Muzan wonders how the 2 Hashira he had seen to be dead could still be alive. He yells Nakaime's name, asking what is going on, and Yoshio responds to him, saying that he is controlling her sight. With a seal across Nakaime's face to block her sight and his hands implanted into her temples, Yoshio had manipulated her into believing that Abanai and Mitsuri had died, and that was what Muzan had seen. The castle begins to shake violently as Yoshio yells with tears in his eyes that Muzan has committed the gravest sin in the world by killing Tameo and declares that he will wipe the demon lord from the face of the world. The Hashira battle Muzan Kibuzui, but the sight of their battle repeatedly changes within the Infinity Castle and Mitsuri Kanroji begins to get dizzy. Muzan snarls at them and the love Hashira cowers in fear, wishing for Chiyomiya Imejima to arrive and aid them, saying that Yoshio's plan to have them pretend to be dead was now in shambles and that Jyutamyoka and Tanjiro Kamado were in greater danger than they had realized. Flashing back to Yoshio explaining his plan to her, Mitsuri recalled how the demon told her to cooperate with him if she wasn't an idiot. She said to herself that she wasn't one. Agreed, and Yoshio told her to distract Nakaime so that he would be able to sneak behind her and take control of her mind to show her a false vision to feed to Muzan of all the Hashira being dead, so that they would all be able to storm him at once with him being caught unaware. Mitsuri is amazed at this ability of his and tells him so. Back at the battle against Muzan, the landscape continues to rapidly change as the Demon Lord identifies that it is Yoshio controlling Nakeim. He attempts to wrest back control of Nakeim's mind from Yoshio and manages to weaken the young demon's hold, even beginning to spread his cells to Yoshio's hand. A demon slayer next to Yoshio offers to be eaten by the demon to strengthen him and give him a better chance against Muzan, but Yoshio fiercely rejects this notion. Muzan's attention is suddenly brought back to the battlefield as Jiryu and Abanigoro attack him with water breathing, 4th form, striking tide and serpent breathing, 1st form. Winding serpent / respectively. Yoshio quickly begins to fight back while Muzan is distracted and manages to have Nakeim change the battlefield again, leaving Muzan and the Hashira falling. As he falls, Muzan reaches forward and clenches his fist, destroying Nakeim's skull. Sensing that the castle will soon collapse, Yoshio attempts to transport all the demon slayers out of the castle before it is destroyed. The floor reappears beneath them all again as the demon slayers continue to fight against Muzan and dodge his attacks. Tanjiro gets hit by one of the attacks and his right shoulder begins bleeding. The castle begins to creak and Abanai senses that it will be destroyed soon, noting that if that happens then only Muzan would survive. Mitsuri notices that they are all being pushed upwards as Muzan launches an attack at her, taking her by surprise. Tanjiro rushes forward to intervene and swings his blade, flinging a demon slayer's broken sword straight into Muzan's head, taking the demon by surprise and infuriating him further. The castle finally stops moving as it bursts through the ground to the outside, flinging them all to the surface. Tanjiro Kamado regains consciousness and sees the night sky above him, finally back at the surface after Yoshio worked to get them all there. Realizing that they are in the middle of the city, Tanjiro panics and Kiryubayashiki sweats and says that they were all flung much further than he had expected they would be. He asks his sister how long it is until dawn and she informs him that there is still an hour and a half left until daybreak as Kiryu's eyes widen at the knowledge that there is still so much longer left. A crow tells the demon slayers how much longer they have left till dawn, and taking note of the fact, Tanjiro looks around to confirm that his comrades are doing all right. Relieved that the Hashira who had been with him are all safe, Tanjiro moves out to try and sniff Muzan out. Suddenly the Demon Lord bursts through a pile of rubble, sending it flying in all directions. Enraged, Muzan taunts the demon slayers and dares them to keep him there until dawn if they could even do so. He launches a wave of attacks that the Hashira all evade and they begin to attack Muzan, Abanai with the serpent breathing, 3rd form, coil choke, Mitsuri with her love breathing, 2nd form. Love pangs and Jiryu with the water breathing, 8th form, waterfall basin. Abanai manages to slice through Muzan's neck but is surprised to see that his blade goes through the demon but is unable to leave any damage. Realizing that he is regenerating the instant they damage him, Muzan begins to attack the Hashira at once, but they are all pushed out of the way by junior demon slayers who wish to give back to the Hashira and allow those who stand a chance against Muzan to survive. They all begin to charge him and Muzan attacks them all, blowing them away. The Hashira are horrified at the scene and their subordinates being killed in droves to protect them. Tanjiro begins to charge in to resume fighting Muzan but falls to the ground, coughing up blood, unable to continue and in great pain. Muzan explains that anyone who dies immediately from his attacks is fortunate as even a wound will be fatal, but those who die from them will suffer great pain. He nods towards Tanjiro as the boy lies on the ground, writhing in pain with a tumor growing and then shrinking over the entire right half of his face, saying that he mixes his blood into all his attacks. Muzan explains that Tanjiro will not become a demon as the concentration of blood in his current attacks is too high and instead it will act as a poison, destroying Tanjiro's cells and killing him. Tanjiro continues to writhe in pain, grabbing his throat, trying to use Hamon to kill the cells, however they had limited his breathing so he couldn't. As Muzan confidently declares that the boy is dead. Elsewhere, Nezuko wakes up and starts running towards Tanjiro to attempt to help him, outrunning the former water Hashira jumping off a cliff. Over at the scene of the battle with Muzan, Tanjiro is still unconscious with a tumor malevolently growing over part of his face as Jayuta Myoka. Abanai Iguro and Mitsuri Kanroji engage the Demon Lord in battle. They are all struck however as Muzan unleashes another flurry of attacks and he commends them for still being able to move but acknowledges that those with Demon Slayer marks would not fall so easily. Mitsuri's wound flares and she is unable to move and she yells at her companions to protect themselves. Muzan's outstretched whip is suddenly cleaved off by Chiyomiya Imejima to Mitsuri's relief. The stone Hashira apologizes for being late as Muzan recognizes him as the demon slayer who slew Kokushibo. He is suddenly taken aback as he is sliced clean down the middle from behind by Sanemi Shinazugawa who flings a few bottles of oil towards the demon who slashes at them and gets drenched in the liquid. Sanemi backflips away and lights a match mid-jump, throwing it towards Muzan, setting the demon on fire. Muzan cries out that Sanemi played a dirty trick to which the Wind Hashira responds that it is a perfect fit for the demon, saying he will grind him to smithereens. Murata peeks out of the rubble at the scene and Jayu notices him, yelling at him to carry Tanjiro Kamado to safety as the boy is unable to move. Touched that Jayu remembered his name as they had been together in their final selection but Jayu had moved far ahead, Murata carries Tanjiro forward as the boy begins to dream. After having been knocked unconscious, Tanjiro's conscious awakens to find himself at an unknown home, commenting how similar it appears to his own. He stands confused at what is happening around him until he sees a man under a tree nearby, respectfully bowing to him. He realizes the man is the swordsman of the original breath, Yoritichi Tsuchikuni. Meanwhile, Murata desperately attempts to resuscitate Tanjiro's physical body. He tries to listen for a pulse but has found that his breathing has stopped and that his heart is no longer beating. A second swordsman discovers Murata and brings him to assist in digging out Yoshio, in the hope that he would be able to save Tanjiro. Back at the home, Yoritichi reveals that he came to speak about what was on his mind and he wanted someone to listen. Tanjiro wonders if it involves the 13th form. He suddenly speaks, saying it's been 2 years since they met and he's glad that Yoritichi is doing all right. As a confounded Tanjiro ponders on the situation, he also states Sumaya was just a baby back then, now much bigger. He realizes his actions and words are those of his ancestor, Sumiyoshi Kamado, he cannot interact with them. Yoritichi states he is happy to see him happy. He is happy when he sees other people happy, and believe it to be a blessing to be born to this world. He would then go on to explain his whole life story and stating that he believed that he was born with the power to defeat Muzan but he was lacking so many innocent lives are going to die. Before Sumiyoshi could figure out a way to console him, Sumaya asks Yoritichi for a hug, with Yoritichi lifting her into the air and beginning to cry. While that was happening, Sumiyoshi's wife Suiko would arrive and offer a meal to help him cheer up. Back in the present time, after a series of attacks from Muzan, Chiyomiya comments on how he appears to be getting faster. So fast that the Mitsuri barely manages to dodge his attacks on pure intuition and luck. Mitsuri, before she can land an attack, realizes that she's getting dragged down by one of Muzan's arms. Another attack from him manages to slice some of the Hashira's right cheek off and injure the shoulder of her right arm. Abanai jumps to rescue her, and with the help of Sanemi, Jayu and Chiyomiya holding Muzan back, he's able to carry her to another demon slayer. He commands him to find Yoshio to treat her injuries and the slayer agrees. However, Mitsuri insists on keep fighting but Abanai doesn't allow her. As he leaves her, she pleads him to not die. Abanai, as he's running, contemplates the number of people that have died, all because of the existence of demons. At first, wishes that he and Maitsuri had met under normal circumstances, but takes it back, saying that he would rather die and cleanse himself of the filthy bloodline he carries within him. His bandages fall behind him as he's running to reveal slits across his cheeks. Abanai restates that he would like to die by killing Muzan to purify his blood and hopes to meet Maitsuri again in another life without demons if he and her are ever reincarnated into humans, and if that happens, he'll confess his love to her. Abanai Iguro and Sanemi Shinazugawa battle Muzan at close quarters, and Abanai chops off one of Muzan's arms, cleverly kicking it away as he severed it to prevent the demon from regenerating immediately. Muzan notes this strategy as well but is unconcerned, saying that the extra time the demon slayer has bought is but a blink. Muzan attacks Abanai with his whip, and the Hashira rues all the energy he is having to waste just to avoid the mouths on the whips. He assuredly thinks that he will only allow himself to faint 1 second after dawn, as every second is precious and had been bought for them with the very lives of all the members of the Demon Slayer Corps. Jayuta Myoka begins to weaken as a result of the venom he has received from all of Muzan's attacks, and his sword is whipped away from him by a whip. Both Abanai and Chiyomiya Imejima intervene and slice it, with Sanemi grabbing his sword and throwing it near the water Hashira and yells at him to focus and or else he will kill him. Jayu gratefully grabs the sword and performs the water-breathing, third form, flowing dance, resolving not to back down and to keep fighting till the very end. Muzan admits that they are more resilient than he had expected but is unconcerned as it is only a matter of time before his venom kills them all, long before dawn. The Hashira continue to struggle against Muzan as the poison continues to weaken them until suddenly Tamao's cat jumps onto the scene and ejects its cargo, vials of antidotes to Muzan's poison. It manages to fire all the vials at the Hashira and they immediately begin to inject the antidote into them as Muzan slices the cat into pieces. Sanemi smiles as he notices his tummus vanish, and Chiyomiya also notices his own frenzied pulse and constant pain vanish, and the Hashira are able to fight with more ease again, which Sanemi is thankful for. Chiyomiya notes that it is possibly just a temporary cure for the symptoms but that they are fortunate for such an event to occur. Muzan quickly deduces what had happened and realizes it was Tamao's doing, cursing her for being a thorn in his side even in death. With immense fury, he launches a frenzied attack that creates multiple craters in the landscape ahead of him. The Hashira all barely manage to dodge the attacks as Abanai wistfully thinks to himself how his contribution has been the lowest, wishing he could land more crucial blows. Thinking that when one's life is in danger one is able to exert explosive strength. He reflects back on how before he had never lifted anything heavier than a pair of chopsticks and his biggest task was escaping a prison cell. He could not believe it himself when he had successfully done so and thinks to what Muagio Tokito did in his final battle against Kokushibo by changing the color of his sword, and that according to the crows all he would have been able to do was grip his sword tightly. Saying he had been shocked when he heard about it and at first believed it had changed color due to a rise in temperature. However, now he realized that to obtain a bright red blade he would have to grip his sword with all his might, and Abanai grits his teeth as he puts all his strength into gripping his sword and it begins to turn bright red. Abanai Iguro reflects on how upon seeing the bright red blade he also started to see stars in his peripheral vision and realized he had made a mistake. Recognizing that he had been too fixated on tightening his grip on his sword and gaining the bright red blade that he had been close to passing out due to lack of oxygen. He is brought back to earth with a yell from Sanemi Shinazugawa, who warns him to watch out as Muzan Kibuzuyi has launched an attack his way. Noting that if even one of them falls it will increase the burden on the others, Abanai tries to stand up and fight, willing himself to make up for Maitsuri Kanroji's absence as well. However, he has lost sensation in all parts of his body except for his sword hand. Myoka attempts to intercept Musen's attack, but he isn't able to outpace the demon's blow. Suddenly, he looks up and sees a Banai up in the air, having successfully dodged the attack. Musen sees this and attempts to attack him in midair, but is shocked to see the serpent Hashira dodge it easily again. Further surprised at his right arm and whips being cut off seemingly from nowhere, Musen notices that it is an odd kind of cut that could not have been made by the weapons of those he is fighting. Forcibly regrowing his severed limb with a delay, Musen then resumes his attack to stop Gyomir Imejima and Sainemi from getting in too close on him. He is further surprised as his left arm is chopped off as a result of a similarly mysterious cut. Musen deduces that it has to be from a blade with jagged edges and realizes that someone else is present who is also aiming to destroy him. Quickly assessing this new threat, Musen analyzes his surroundings, saying that even if a spell from Tamao's demon could make someone invisible, it couldn't erase traces of their existence. Though he is unable to see any silhouettes through the dust clouds, Musen is still able to hear the air parting in some areas. Deducing that there are 3 hidden attackers around him, he slices at their approximate locations and is able to land a hit on all 3 of them. Inosuke Hashibira, Kaneo Zuyori and Zenitsu Agatsuma suddenly pop into view as some seals placed on their heads get sliced off by Musen's attacks. They are taken aback at how quickly he was able to find them out, but Gyomir is pleasantly surprised to notice them all still alive, as Inosuke boasts he wouldn't die and that he had plenty of seals to spare. Musen unceremoniously interrupts Inosuke's monologue and swipes at him with a whip, but his attention is drawn back to himself mid-attack as a Banai slices off both of his arms. He is displeased at the time it takes his arms to regrow from these attacks by a bright red blade, and Sainemi is heartened as he notes this fact to his companions. Kaneo and Zenitsu hurriedly put on new seals and attack Musen with flower breathing, 4th form, Crimson Hanagromo, and thunder breathing, 1st form, thunderclap and flash. Enraged, Musen calls them a bunch of pesky flies, saying they have nothing but pitiful tricks, but is interrupted by a Banai who attacks him with the serpent breathing, 3rd form, coil choke. Gyomir thinks to himself that this addition to their numbers and a Banai manifesting a bright red blade has helped them, and it also allows him to concentrate more. The stone Hashira clangs his weapons together, and upon impact both of them change color to bright red before swinging at Musen and knocking off his entire left shoulder, exposing his spine. The demon pauses and Sainemi yells Jiryu to prepare himself as he swings his blade at Jiryu's, turning both of their weapons bright red as well. A crow arrives overhead and announces that dawn will break in 1 hour and 3 minutes, and Sainemi declares that there is no problem as they will chop Musen into pieces. Yoshio injects Tanjiro Kamado multiple times with the antidote to Musen's poison made by Tamao to try and rejuvenate him. As the demon slayers around him ask if injecting Tanjiro so many times is safe for him, he quietens them and says that his condition, since it's been some time since Musen struck him. The demon slayers try to free Tanjiro's katana from his hands but fail as he has a very tight grip on it. Yoshio takes this as a sign that Tanjiro still has the will to fight, and suddenly the demon slayer holding Tanjiro's head yells out saying that he felt his pulse return. They attempt to wake him up, and when one of them mentions that Musen might get away, they are all taken aback as Tanjiro's katana begins to creak as his grip on it tightens considerably and he jolts back to consciousness. Back at the fight with Musen, a Kakushi hidden out of sight peers over to see how things are faring and gets hope that they might hold out until dawn. Gyomir Imejima cleaves off the left half of Musen's torso as Sainemi Shinazugawa rushes over to a pile of seals on the ground and puts one on his forehead. As soon as he puts it on, he is able to see Kaneo Zuyori, Zenitsu Agatsuma and Inosuke Hashibira, as the latter declares he wants a bright red blade like the Hashira as well. Sainemi launches the wind-breathing, 7th form, gale, sudden gusts towards Musen. Gyomir is relieved at the arrival of the new fighters as that allowed him to concentrate more, looking into the transparent world. He sees that Muzan has multiple hearts and brains and thus will not die if they chop off his head. He also notes that they move around inside his body, making it difficult to strike them. An idea suddenly strikes him, believing that if the others could also see Muzan in the transparent world, then they would be able to strike the organs simultaneously and destroy Muzan for good. He calls out to the others to look closely at Muzan's body and see if their vision changes and if they can see through him. For an instant Abanigoro is able to do so and is shocked at the phenomenon. He doesn't have long to ponder on this, however, as Muzan launches a devastating attack in all directions and crushes everything around him, flinging everyone into their surroundings. The hidden Kikuchi is shocked at the sound and looks over again to see what had happened and is dumbfounded as he sees Muzan standing on his own and the surrounding area having sustained heavy damage. Looking right next to him, he is even more baffled as he sees Chiyomiya knocked into the building he is hiding behind and that he has lost a leg. His horror only grows as he sees that Sanemi has been flung into the upper story of a tall building while Abanai, Zenitsu and Inosuke are all unconscious in the rubble and Jayuta Myoka's sword arm has been severed. Kaneo's sword is snapped in two as her seal falls off her and she falls to her knees with Muzan right in front of her. She attempts to urge herself to stand up and attack him, however she can only stare transfixed at him in fear and shock. The Kikuchi rushes from his hiding to place towards her as Muzan begins to attack but is interrupted by Tanjiro performing the Hinakami Kagura. Beneficent radiance and cuts off Muzan's arm with it as the remaining stump of flesh on him sizzles. Muzan looks at it in concern as it does not regrow immediately and instead started to pass Hamon through his body, melting him. Reaching up to his shoulder before Muzan could chop off the infected limb, as Tanjiro apologizes to Kaneo for being late. Handing her off to the Kikuchi, he turns to face Muzan, who says that the boy looks positively awful and taunts him by saying that in his current condition it is difficult to tell just who the demon is between the two of them. As he gazes at the boy, Muzan is reminded of Yoritichi's Ujakuni and says he makes his skin crawl, and Tanjiro challenges Muzan, saying they should finish it. Okay guys, this is the end of this part of What If Tanjiro Had Hamon. If you enjoyed, please like the video. Leave a comment and subscribe to the channel with notifications enabled to be notified whenever I upload. With that out the way, this is Demonic Saiyan saying bye.